Great, thank you very much. You can hear me all right? That's fine, yeah?
Yep.
Well, really nice to be with you today. And yes, I'm going to do a little bit about talking about succession. Um, and as I just said now, there will be an opportunity to ask questions later on. Now, before I forget, if you don't want to ask questions in public today, or if, as like me, afterwards you think, oh God, I should have asked something, you're very welcome to either email me or phone me and ask me questions afterwards. There's no problem about that at all. My details will be on the Farming Connect website. So yes, I've been doing this for a long time now. I tell people I'm the farmer's daughter whose brother got the farm and I got nothing. But there we are, you know, that's what life is about. And I'm of that generation when that was totally acceptable. Things have changed. And so what do? Well, my job is, well, I run workshops and webinars and things like this, and I speak at conferences. But I also, my main job is actually facilitating the family discussion. So what I do is I'm called into the family, we get everybody to sit around the table, and I actually talk to each person. So each person has an opportunity to say what they want to happen in the future, any concerns or worries they have, and all that sort of thing. And so I sit with the family and manage that discussion. And okay, I know a little bit about tax and a little bit about the legal side of things, but I'm not trained in those areas. But I know enough to be able to say, hang on a minute, I think you may have a problem there, and be able to signpost you to other people. And incidentally, that meeting that I would facilitate with families in Wales, Farming Connect fully funds it. I am one of the mentors as part of the scheme. So what I'm going to do today is, I could talk for hours about this. And so what I'm going to do today is talk briefly about some of the things that you need to be talking about as far as succession is concerned. Because if you can sort this out yourself without the help of anybody like me, that's fine. You know, it's a brilliant thing to be able to do. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the things that need to be discussed. So let's start first of all by remembering that succession will happen. Nobody gets out of this alive. You know, so we need to be able to plan for this. And probably, so a lack of proper succession plan is probably the biggest threat to the family business and to the family farm. Because if we haven't got that robust plan and something happens, invariably big problems occur. You know, somebody could end up with a big tax bill or the family fall out. And so you need to be talking about this at an early stage. So people say to me, well, when should we start talking about this? And I say, really, well, as soon as you have children, because you need to start planning then. In fact, I sometimes say to people, you need to grow your business to the size of your family, which is a great form of birth control when you think about it. But it is really important that you think about, right, okay, I've got 3 children. All of them might want to farm. Will I be able to facilitate that in the future? Will I be able to manage that? And I have done meetings with young couples who have small children, and they've already started that planning process, you know, and saying, right, okay, well, if all 3 want to farm, we need to be able to grow this business. And also maybe to think about, okay, we may need to buy a sort of house in the village or something that if one of the children doesn't want to farm, there is an asset there that can be used for that child or sold in order to be able to give that child a good start in life. Because we want to give all our children a good start in life. But I do say you don't have to be equitable to be fair. Just because one child gets the farm and that farm is worth 2 million quid doesn't mean to say you have to give 2 million quid to all the other children. You know, that would be impossible probably. And also, you know, we all know that the value of the farm bears very little resemblance to its earning capacity. And also, if that young person is committing to that business, you know, they need to be able to be sure that they're going to have that farm in the future. So those are some of the things we need to think about. So let's go back a bit now and think about, right, okay, what are the things you need to discuss when a young person comes back into the business? You know, they may have gone and got education, you know, gone to Harper Adams or something like that. And also I do encourage young people to go and work for somebody else for a while, even in another industry, if you like, because it gives them a broader view of the world and also brings them, you know, brings back better skills and newer skills to the business, and they have a bit of a more worldwide view. And particularly if you've got quite a small business, maybe then working for somebody else for a number of years and then bringing back actual money could enable that business then to expand, to be able to accommodate them. So that's quite an important thing. When I talk to young people, I do emphasize that for them. But okay, you've got this young person coming back into the business. Well, what do you need to talk about? Well, I think it's very important that you sit down and talk about what they're going to do in this business. Often they come back and it's all very sort of unofficial, really. And so it's really important to say, right, okay, what are you expecting from this young person? And what is that young person expecting of this business? So the first thing to do is to do the easy thing. I always think it's best to sort out and talk about the easy things first. So the first thing would be to say time, right? Okay, what time is this young person expected to start in the morning? And what time do they hope to finish in the evening? I've been a dairy farmer. I know it's hope, okay? But what time do we hope to finish in the evenings? Clarify that so there are no arguments, because I've gone into lots of families where there are huge arguments about these sorts of things. So starting it off on the right foot and saying, right, okay, we expect you to start this time in the morning and we hope to finish this time in the evening. Are you going to have weekends off or every other weekend off? What about holidays? And are there certain times of the year when nobody takes a holiday, lambing or calving or whatever, like silage, whatever. So it's really important to clarify those things so it prevents any sort of conflict in the future. So that's a nice easy one, time. Sort that one out. The next one then is housing. Now, where is this young person going to live? Now, if this young person comes back, and they may very well come back with a spouse or a partner or someone like that, you really need to sit and talk about this and how this is going to be managed. And I have now, after 14 years of doing this, I very confidently say for the young person coming back into that business, very carefully consider that you should really not be living within sight of mum and dad. Now, lots of people laugh about this and think, oh yeah, that's hilarious and all that. But seriously, I've come across some really difficult situations where families have fallen out because they've lived too close together. And, they're overlooking each other. And, I've had daughter-in-law saying my mother-in-law is spying on me and all that sort of stuff. So it's really important to sit down and talk about, right, okay, where are these people going to live? And they need to they have their own privacy. I remember doing a family meeting in Ireland some years ago now. Unfortunately, the family are still friends with me. But I remember the daughter-in-law there they were having great difficulty because what had happened was the eldest son had got married and he was coming back to the family farm. And mum and dad said, right, okay, we've got a barn on the farm right next to the farmhouse at right angles. So they were looking into each other. We'll convert this barn and we'll go and live in the barn and you can go and live in the farmhouse. So that was grand. So mum and dad went and they converted this barn and they put in the kitchen, the bathroom and all that sort of stuff. But when it came to it, dad refused to move out of the farmhouse. And so daughter-in-law had to move into this barn conversion where she hadn't chosen the kitchen and she hadn't chosen the bathroom. So that was a big sort of problem for a start. So that didn't go down too well. And then I remember her in that meeting saying to me that day, the problem is, she said, when my father-in-law wants to speak to my husband, he doesn't come and knock on the door. He goes walking around the house, looking through all the windows to see if he can see him. Drove her up the wall. And so it's really important that you think about where people are going to live and to respect their privacy. Again, in that same family, they were quarreling about where they parked the cars on the yard. They were quarreling about which part of the garden people had. And so it's a good idea to sit down and talk about this before you get the problems, okay? So that's housing at that stage. The next area then is money. When this young person comes back into the business, how are you going to pay them? What are you going to pay them? You may want them to come straight into the partnership. And if you do, that's fine. But you may sort of think, well, right, okay, let's just give it a few years to see how we're going. And that's fine too. But you really need to think about how this person is going to be paid and how much. Gone are the days where a young person was going out the door on a Friday night and they were bound to fiver and say, don't worry, boy, one day all this will be yours. And it always was boy as well. These days we need to sit and think about it. And okay, if you decide we can't pay people what they would get somewhere else, I think it is very important that young people are acknowledged for how much they are worth, even if you can't pay them that. You know, for instance, if they're worth 30,000 a year, then it needs to be acknowledged that that is how much they are worth, even if you're not paying them that. It's good for their self-esteem. And also it's good for other brothers and sisters who may not be in the business to understand that their brother or sister is coming back to the family farm and they're going to take a cut in wages because the business can't afford them to pay the full rack. And that's really important to remember. And so acknowledge how much they're worth and then think about how you're going to pay them. And I would suggest one of the ways of thinking about this is to say, right, okay, let's say this young person is worth 25,000 a year. Okay, we can't pay you that, but you are worth 25,000. We can pay you 15. So you say, right, okay, we can pay you £15,000 a year. There's a £10,000 shortfall there. Then you need to think, right, okay, let's think about what this young person's going to get extra because they're working on a family farm. And there always are. There are always perks, you know, the use of a telephone, the use of a vehicle, the diesel tank on the yard, all those sorts of things. So put a value on them. You know, say, right, okay, but this is how much this is worth. And it's important for that young person because then they value it more. And also it's important again for the brothers and sisters to realise, you know, that that has been taken into account. Because I have gone into families where, you know, what I call the off-farm children, the children who are not going to farm, are saying, well, it's all right for him or her, you know, they never have to pay for their diesel, they've got a free vehicle or whatever. And so it's really important to value that and put that in it. So say, for instance, in this example, that those perks came to £5,000. Well, you're already up to £15,000 to £20,000 now already. So you think then about that £5,000 shortfall, that shortfall for the 25,000. And you say, right, okay, what are we going to do about this? And I would suggest you keep a record of it. Because I've gone into lots of families where young person has been there now for 20 years. So they're not so young anymore. They've been there for 20 years, never been paid properly. And all of a sudden they've got people wanting to make a claim on that business. And they're saying, well, hang on a minute, I've worked here for 20 years and I've never been paid properly. And it's a hell of a job then to sort out how much that business owes that person. So it's really important to keep a record of it and say, right, okay, well, this business owes that person £5,000 this year, might be £7,000 next year. So you keep a record of it so that if there is a challenge in the future, there is a record to say, right, this business owes that much to that person. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way to look at it would be to say, well, right, okay, this may be a way of this person buying their way into the business. They could be buying £5,000 worth of stock or £5,000 worth of shares in a company, if that's the company structure that you're using. And so there are ways of them buying into the business. And again, that, you know, that's good for the off-farm children because some of them will say, well, you know, they're being given this business on a plate. We all know that that's not true. But to be able to do this sort of thing makes it look so much better. So those are some of the suggestions about sort of paying a young person when they come back into the business. And going on from that as well, I think it's quite important to remember, going on for a few years in time, that there needs to be a line drawn in the sand sometime. Because if you can't, well, if you're sort of looking at, say, right, okay, this young person has come back into the business, and now all of a sudden the business has expanded because of that young person's efforts, then it's important to say, right, okay, that expansion should be down to that young person's efforts and should not be shared with brothers and sisters. Because often, you know, you sort of say, well, okay, you know, my brother or sister is getting a farm now that's worth such and such. Well, a lot of the increase in that value might have been down to that young person's efforts. And so it shouldn't be shared with brothers and sisters. It should be for the benefit of that young person who has committed their future to that farm. So sometimes there has to be a line drawn in the sand and said, right, okay, from now on, any growth in this business is down to that young person's efforts and should not be thought of to be shared with brothers and sisters. I also say to young people, when you go back into the family farm, if you can get rid of your brothers and sisters early, that's a good idea. Preferably not with a shotgun. But I think it's a good idea if you can do it because, again, I speak to so many young people or older people who are saying, I've got to pay out my brothers and sisters. Sometimes they say, I don't even know how much I'm going to have to pay them, and I don't know when it's going to happen. And so there's like this thing hanging over them. And sadly, I've gone into some businesses where a brother or a sister who's running the farm says, I'm not growing this business. I'm not going to grow it anymore, because the bigger I grow it, the more I have to pay my brothers and sisters. So if you can pay out brothers and sisters at an early stage, it's a good idea. If you can't, you can't, and that's all about it. But I have dealt with families where they've even sort of gone to the bank and borrowed money to be able to pay some money out to brothers and sisters, so they're paid out. So it's better for the young person who's on the farm, but it's actually usually better for those young people as well, because that's usually when they need the money. You know, they may have a whacking great student debt, or they may want to buy a house or something like that. And so I've gone into families where that's what they've done. You know, one of the children has got the farm, and the other brothers and sisters have bought houses or had deposits for houses and that sort of thing. So it's important to consider those things as well. And as I say, you don't have to be equitable to be fair. Okay, so that's the money area of that for this young person. The next area is the most important, actually, and that is communication. Now, if you sort of pushed me up against the wall and said, right, what's the most important thing to be sorting out in a family business, and which is probably the most neglected thing, and that is proper communication within the business. People don't just don't talk to each other properly about things. You know, I have friends outside farming and they say, oh, isn't it lovely? All the family working together, and isn't it great? And you think, God, they haven't got a clue, have they? And so it's really important that people communicate properly. Now, the thing I'm going to propose now, lots of people say, oh God, that's ridiculous. But this is the one thing that people come back to me and say, you know, that was the best thing that came out of that meeting. And that is, I suggest that particularly when you've got a young person coming back in, you have proper business meetings on the farm. It might be once a week, once a fortnight, might be only 15 minutes. But it's really important to sit down as a business and treat each other as business partners rather than parent and children, and talk about what you're doing, you know, the operational meeting of the business. What are you going to do in the next 2 weeks? What have you done in the last 2 weeks, and what went right and what went wrong, and what can you do better next time? And have proper planning of what's going on. So there is none of this, oh, well, I don't know what's happening, or, you know, people planning to do something and then, you know, other members of the family aren't there to help, or, you know, even a TB test coming up and nobody knows about it. So it's really important to sit down and have proper communication. Proper communication, really important. And you know, lots of family members say to me when I'm talking to them before a meeting and say, oh, well, I know what the rest of the family want. I can guarantee you, if you have not sat down and talked to the family about what they want, you don't know. The number of times I've had such surprises in family meetings because people have sort of revealed what they want to happen and they've never said it before. So it's really, really important to sit down and talk properly. So communicate with this young person. So this young person now, if they're sitting down every week or fortnight, they feel part of the business. They feel part of the decision-making process. You know, they're not just a worker. They're there and part of the decision-making. And that's really important for their self-esteem and also for their training to be able to run the business in the future. So communication, very, very important. Family meetings and farm, you know, business meetings. The other thing going on from that then is responsibility. I talk a lot to older farmers and I say it's really, really important that you give responsibility to young people at an early stage because they want it. That's when you've got the energy, you know, when you get to my age, you're knackered, you know. And so it's really important that the young people have the opportunity to take on responsibility for parts of the business. If the older generation is still quite young and they're still wanting to run the business, that's fine. But give the young people some sort of responsibility within that business. An example would be on a dairy farm, say, for instance, to say to the young person, right, okay, you're in charge of young stock. I will be giving you a calf at 24 hours old. It will have had its colostrum and it'll be tagged and all that. The calf will be given to you at 24 hours old. I want that animal back calving in the herd at 2 years old. You can go and rear it any way you want, but I want that animal back in the herd. Okay, you have to put checks and balances in there. I'll give you a budget so you don't spend too much money on it. And also maybe we will weigh that animal at regular intervals to make sure that she's on track to be in the herd at 2 years old. You know, those are the things that need to be done. And it's so motivating for young people to be able to be responsible for something, because it's very, very difficult. Again, I get young people talking to me saying, I was encouraged to come back home and I'm not giving any responsibility at all. I'm just told what to do. That's not fair. That really is not fair. And, I've talked to some young people who actually worked for other people and they had more responsibility there than they did in our own family farm. So it's really important to encourage young people and let them have their own responsibility in the business. So that's about it about the young person coming back into the business. I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but that's the basics of what you need to be thinking about and talking about when you're getting that young person into the business. So we'll go on to the other end now, and that is when mum and dad want to step out. What you need to be thinking about and talking about then. Well, I'd say to the older generation, you need to be thinking about this at an early stage. And even, I talk to young farmers and I say, actually, you should be beginning with the end in mind, thinking already about what age do you think you will want to retire? And what does retirement mean to you? And that's a very important question. What does retirement mean to you? Because it means different things to different people. You have at one end the people who say, I can't wait to get out the gate, to the other end where they're saying the only way you're getting out of here is in a box, and all points in between. And so it's really important to clarify for your own self-esteem if you're the person, but also for the rest of the family to understand what you mean by retirement and what that is going to be. And it's brilliant because I've gone to some families where they have retired to another business. Because let's face it, farmers have tremendous skills. They have a wide range of skills that are very transferable to other businesses. And a couple of the most easy meetings I've had have been where the older generation have retired from farming into another business. And that's been a really important thing to do. So, do mum and dad want to do that? Or are they saying, right, okay, we want to be part of this business going forward? Well, what does that mean? And that's when you need to start clarifying. Okay, you're 65 now. What do you want to be doing when you're 70? Do you still want to be milking cows or lambing ewes or whatever, What are your level of responsibilities going to be in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years? So we have a plan then of how mum and dad are stepping back, and also then a plan for how the next generation are stepping up to the plate and taking on those responsibilities over time and having a timeline for it. And somewhere along the line, there has to be a space where the overall responsibility for the business passes from one generation to the next. It's even a good idea to put a date on it and not to move that date as it gets closer. And so then everybody understands, right, we're working towards this where mum and dad will be stepping back gradually and the younger generation stepping up to it. Okay, mum and dad might still want to be part of the business, but they often say, the older generation often say to me, we want to be part of it. We don't want to have the responsibility, but we want to be there and to be helping and doing something. So what is that something? And maybe you need to be swapping around. Say, for instance, when I said earlier about the responsibility of the young person in the dairy farm, maybe you swap around and perhaps dad is now responsible for rearing the young stock, that type of thing. So it's clarified. It's very clear about what people's roles are. So it sort of sets the older generation's mind at rest. They understand what's happening. And also the younger generation, they can plan for it and they know they're going to be part of this business. Because sadly, and I have come across this so many times, is I go into families and you have the younger generation who are now in their 50s and they still have no responsibility for that business. And that's a disaster, an absolute disaster. And I think we're doing a huge disservice to the industry if we are not bringing those young people in and bringing in those new ideas. And let's face it, agriculture is changing very quickly at the moment, and it's going to keep on changing. And we need those young people in. So it's really important that we encourage those young people into the industry and give them the responsibility to be able to take our wonderful industry forward. But we have to care for mum and dad. And that's important too. So, okay, mum and dad, they want to retire, and what that means, discuss it, clarify it. The next area is, well, where are mum and dad going to live? Are they going to be living in the farmhouse still? You have to be careful about that one because there may be tax implications for that. Because if they're no longer part of the business, maybe that house may be taken for inheritance tax. So you need to understand that and understand where, you know, and also the other thing about it is the practicalities of it. If they're living in the farmhouse and daughter and son-in-law who are running the farm are living 3 miles down the road, well, it's not fair for them to have to come back for lambing or calving or anything like that. So the person who's farming should be on the farmyard. So that needs to be talked about, and at an early stage. Sadly, again, I've gone into family businesses where gran and granddad are still living in the farmhouse. They're now in their 80s, and it's a big farmhouse, and they're living in 2 rooms, you know, and it's not fair. And the problem with that is once they're at that stage, they're not going to move. It's too late. So for all of us of an older generation, we need to be thinking in our 50s, right, when am I going to move out the farmhouse? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? How am I going to manage that? Very important to have that conversation. And also for the older generation to be moving into a house that is suitable for old age. You know, you don't want to be like granny and granddad living in 2 rooms in a very cold, horrible house. You know, I often go in and mum is sitting there saying, well, I'd like to have quite a nice bungalow in the village or something like that, you know. So it's very important to be able to listen to mum. And that is another thing that we need to have that conversation at that stage, is to be able to talk to mum. Because often there is a woman in a business who has given her all and has been there putting the farm first for the last 40 years. And she's probably never been asked about what she wants in the future. So it's really important to sit down and talk to mum and say, right, okay, mum, what do you want? And often she won't be saying, well, I want a holiday in the Caribbean or I want to cruising around the world. She'll just say, well, I'd like a few days off now and again. I'd like to go off and, you know, take my husband with me for a few days out. And by that stage, he's sulking. But, you know, it's important to have a chat about that and for her to understand, you know, that she's thought of as well. So very important to talk to both partners about what they think retirement is for them and to help them. Now, the next area to look at obviously is money. How are mum and dad going to live? Have they got enough pension? You know, you can find out about how much the state pension is going to be. That's not going to be too exciting. And have they got their own personal pension? If not, how are they going to live? And often if there isn't enough money, there's an expectation that they're going to have an income from the farm. Now, it's very important that you put a figure on it. You can go to the accountant and work it out if you like, or just sort of spend a year monitoring how much money mum and dad need for a year. But it's very important to put that figure on it so that mum and dad feel confident that that money is coming to them every year. And also the person running the business understands that they have that particular amount that's in the budget there every year. I mean, you can index link it to inflation if that's what you want to do as well, but there is a budgeted figure there that is paid to mum and dad every year. And think about big ticket items as well. You know, what if they want a new car? How's that going to be paid for? So it's really important that you put that figure on that, because I have gone into businesses where mum and dad sort of have an open checkbook, they have access to the farm account, and, you know, there was one family where, you know, a few years ago when the milk price was absolutely on the floor, and it was a dairy farm, and milk price on the floor, and the ones running the farm were cutting the costs to the bone because they knew they had to survive this downturn. And mum and dad went out and bought a car. It nearly killed them. So it's really important to clarify those things, and so that those sort of things don't happen. So that's the money side of things. The other area then to think about, and it's very important for the older generation, is their self-esteem. Farmers aren't people who happen to earn a living farming. They are farmers. That's who they are. And so you have to take that into account, because all of a sudden, you know, they're going to the mum and dad are going to the Royal Welsh or something like that. And all of a sudden they're not being called into the stands anymore because they don't have the checkbook. And so it's almost as if their standing in the community and in the agricultural community has dropped. And you have to understand that, and you have to be sympathetic towards that, and, you know, include them in things as well. So that's really important to discuss and understand. So those are most of the areas then that I would talk about, and I think that people should understand. You have to be very careful then about the ownership of the farm. Now, when you look at succession, you look at 2 areas. It's the business and it's the land ownership. And they are different things, because you can have somebody as part of the business that doesn't yet own part of the land. But there has to be consideration about the older generation. When are they going to pass that land on to the next generation? Now, as things stand at the moment, we have 100% agricultural property relief. So technically, the older generation could leave that land and that farm to the next generation, and they shouldn't, as long as you've sorted out with your tax expert, and you don't do anything without talking to your tax expert, but they shouldn't have to pay inheritance tax in the future. But if there is a problem in that, and that is if mum or dad or both of them needed nursing care in the future, that farm will be taken to pay for the nursing care. You know, that will be taken into account. And sadly, I know of a farmer in Wales, actually, whose father died, mother owned the farm. He farmed with his mother. They never thought about it. She still owned the business. He ran the business. And she went into nursing care, and she was there a long time. He had quite a small, it was about, 150 acres farm, which is, average size for Wales, 150 acre farm. In the end, he had to sell it because she was in a nursing home for so long and it was so expensive. And so it's really important to think about, right, okay, when are we going to hand this farm on to the next generation to avoid that sort of thing? So you need to have that sort of conversation with your tax advisor and with your legal advisor as well, as when that is the best time. And again, talk to the family about it, because there are huge implications. So I'm nearly coming to the end now. We've got a few more things to talk about, and then we'll open up to questions. But there are a couple of areas that really need to be thought about. First of all is wills. Everybody should have a will. No exceptions. I've heard of every excuse under the sun and none of them are valid. The favourite one is, oh, well, when things settle down, I'll make a will. Okay, things never settle down. So you make a will for today, for the circumstances for today. And if those circumstances change, then you change your will. And it's really important. I often speak to, groups of farmers, and somebody will say, oh, yeah, well, I've got a will. I made it 25 years ago. Well, it's probably not going to be very relevant at that stage. So it's very important to review your will. So if you've got a will, I would suggest you take it out the drawer every 2 years and just look at it to make sure it's still valid. But you should have a will. In fact, you must have a will, because otherwise there are huge complications and it can be very, very expensive for the next generation to sort that out. So everybody has to have a will. The other document you need to consider is power of attorney. I've gone into businesses where they have had huge problems because they haven't had power of attorney for older family members. But it's not just old family members as well. I've gone into a lot of businesses now, and what they're saying is, as soon as you become a partner in the business, we're signing power of attorney for you. So power of attorney is, I've done it myself in recent years. If, say, for instance, me now, if I lose my mental capacity, I mean, my children think I have already, but if I lose my mental capacity, both my children will have power of attorney over my finances. So they would be able to pay my bills and things like that. And so it's very important that that is thought about, because if you don't do it, you have to go to the Office of Public Guardian, or you have to go to court every time you want to make a decision and access some money. So it's really important to get that in place, because it's hugely, hugely expensive if you don't. So think about power of attorney as well. And as I say, it's not just for older people. I did a family meeting years ago now up in County Durham, where the mum and dad actually were going to run another business. So they were leaving the family farm, but for the first 2 or 3 years of that business, they were going to have an income from the farm, but they were letting their son run it, and he was going to be sole trader. He was 25 years old, but they actually had to have power of attorney for him because he raced motorbikes. And they thought, oh my God, if he has an accident and he's in a coma for 2 months, that business will completely shut down and we won't have any income at all. And that is what happens. The bank account freezes, the lot. So it's really important that you consider having power of attorney. Now, I'll talk to your solicitor about how you would do that as well. That's what you need to be thinking about. But very, very important. Now, just a few little things about the difficulties in family businesses as well. Psychologists tell us there are 2 things that I in particular come across. And one of them is father-son rivalry. And this is real. Now, luckily enough, there's no father-daughter or not even mother-daughter, but there is father-son rivalry. And that can be very, very difficult to deal with. Now, I've gone into families where fathers and sons have worked together really well. And then the other end of the scale where it's been very difficult. And there was one I dealt with in summer last year where they couldn't even be in the same room together. they just couldn't do it. So, and that was tragic, absolutely tragic. So that, again, that's why communication is important. You have those weekly or fortnightly meetings so that there is an opportunity for people to communicate properly. But it's very sad that that happens, and you have to be aware that that can happen in a family. The other area then is sibling rivalry. And I do say to people, be very, very careful about putting brothers or sisters or brothers and sisters in a business together. It might work very well in the beginning, they're in Young Farmers together and they're going out in the beer road together and having fun, and that's great. And then things change as they get older and they get married. And of course, mum and dad blame daughter-in-law or son-in-law and say, oh, it's their fault. But actually it's not. When people get married or have partners, they change. And it changes the family dynamic. And all of a sudden, their little family units want something different. And so I have to say that the hardest family meetings I've ever facilitated are where brothers and sisters or sisters have fallen out. And it's devastating, absolutely devastating. So I do say to people, be very careful about putting siblings into a business together. Parents say, oh, it'll be fine, it's so much better for them, it'll share the costs and all that thing. It can be a disaster. And anyway, you have to think of the next generation, because then you've got cousins coming in, and is that going to work? And so it's very important, if brothers and sisters work well together and they want to, that's fine, but be very careful about it. Be very careful. So that's about it, I think. I can go on forever about this. And I haven't even talked about divorce yet. But if there are any questions, I think maybe we ought to go to that first then, just in case there are questions, so that you have an opportunity to question me on a particular area that you want.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Sian. I think what you've mainly demonstrated is that succession is such a difficult topic. It just goes by a case basis, and there's no simple answer, is there? But yeah, we have had a few questions through, so I'll quickly whiz through those. And again, if anybody have got any questions, please be sure to put them in the box, and they'll come through to me then, and we can be sure to answer them. I suppose one thing that we should mention, agriculture is such a busy lifestyle, and things crop up, things happen day to day you don't always plan for. How do you make sure that succession is a priority within that lifestyle then, and how do you make sure that we do be sure to plan it? What would you recommend?
I think it's something that people really need to be thinking about. It's discipline. Yeah, that's the problem with succession, I think, is it's not pressing on you every day. It's not as important as, oh my God, we've got to get silage in, or we'll shear in, or whatever, And so it isn't pressing on it. So it's a self-discipline to be able to do that. So I would suggest, you at least sit down once a year and say, right, okay, once a year we're going to sit down and we're going to talk this through. And it is a process. It isn't an event. You just sort of say, you can't say, all right, okay, that's sorted, fantastic. You need to be sitting down at least once a year and talking through, right, okay, are we doing the right things? And, I could go on and tell you absolute horror stories that make your hair stand on end, that will make you want to do the succession planning. So it's really important that you sit down and talk about it and use experts. There are tax people out there, there are solicitors out there, there are all these people out there that are able to help you, because my God, some of the things I've come across are absolutely shocking, not only financially, but as far as family are concerned as well, and people falling out and threatening each other and all sorts of stuff. So it's really important, but it is self-discipline. So as I say, at least once a year, it ought to be part of the business plan of the business, because it is really, it's part of the business plan.
Yeah, definitely. And also, do you think there should be something to aid with attitude change, perhaps? Is that something that should be considered when succession planning, or?
Yeah, it's a big one. There is this clash of the two generations, and it happens in all sorts of areas and all walks of life, doesn't it? Where you've got the older generation, sort of they've got a different attitude of life at that stage. Well, a lot of them have, because they've done it all, and they're sort of saying, well, right, okay, we're a bit more risk averse now because we want to sit back and enjoy it. Whereas the young people are coming in and saying, oh, we'll have a go at this and we'll have a go at that, and yeah, and mum and dad are going, oh, for God's sake, and that's going to cost a fortune. I did that 30 years ago and it never worked, blah, blah, blah. So there is always going to be this clash, and that again is why there needs to be good communication. You need to accept it. You're not an awful family because you fall out over this. You're quite natural, but it's really important that you sit down and talk about it. you know, and sort of say, right, okay, this is what's happening. And if you find that it's difficult, then get somebody in to help you talk through it. But it's only natural. And I think there has to be a bit of give and take. You know, you have to, the younger generation have to respect the older generation. You know, I do say to people, there's a saying, and it's very true in agriculture, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And succession is not is not a right. It is a privilege, and it's thanks to the older generation's work and dedication that there is a farm there to pass on to the next generation. But on the other hand, the older generation have to realise that they're very fortunate that they've got a young person who wants to come in and run the business, because there's a lot of people who haven't, you know, and we could talk about that as well. But, you know, and so it's good for the older generation to say, well, hang on a minute, we're very lucky. We've got somebody else coming in who wants to run this business. So there has to be this respect for both generations, you know, and you have to rub along as best as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. So I've got a question that's come in here. What if parents don't retire and farm ends up only to be passed on by death?
Yeah, that is an awkward one, and I think again it's communication, but at least you understand that's going to happen, you know, because what I find is that, you know, I've gone into a couple of farms, and it's only happened a couple of times, but it's terrible, where a young person has been promised the farm, they're now older, and all of a sudden the second parent dies and they've left the farm to somebody else. And that's how I've seen that a couple of times now. Okay, you can go to court and you can challenge that and all that, but really you don't want to be going down that route at all, you know. And so, yeah, if the old generation say, right, okay, we're going to leave it to death, you know, you probably need to be getting somebody in to who they respect to say, well, look, these are the implications of doing that. You know, there may be a big tax bill to pay. There may, you know, the family may fall out. I often actually go in to speak to say Grassland Society or something, you know, and some old boy will say in the back, well, I don't care what happens because I'll be dead, you know. Oh God, I get strangling, you know. And so I say, well, yeah, but do you want to be remembered as the family member who caused so much trouble because they couldn't be bothered to sort it out properly, you know? And so it's very important. And so if the older generation are refusing to talk about it, and some do, you know, they refuse to talk about it, then try and influence them, get the rest of the family together, because it's very important that it's not just the farming ones who would do it then, it's all the family, because otherwise it looks like the farming ones are trying to sort of grab it, if you like, and being greedy, but they want security, they need security going forward. And so everybody get together and try and persuade mum and dad, or if they can't do that, talk to somebody who mum and dad respect and get them to persuade them to sort something out. Very important, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And another question. So in regards to wills, who do you recommend for executor? A family member or someone outside the business, outside with better business knowledge?
It depends what you want out of it in the end, really. I think, you know, some families say, yeah, I'm very happy for my family members to do it. However, you've got to be very careful, you know, say if you've got 3 children and you only have 2 as executives, well, the one who isn't going to be executive might be really offended about that. And so you have to consider who the executives are. And next you have to ask them if they're happy to do it. Because it's not really a good idea to appoint somebody as an executor of your will and you won't ask them. You know, they might say, oh, I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. So you must talk to people about that. So it depends. I mean, if you feel that your children, say, are not capable of sorting it out themselves, or they're going to fall out, maybe then having someone from outside would be a good idea. You know, I would suggest obviously somebody younger than you, because, you know, that'd be quite sensible. And you may think, well, yeah, that's obvious. No, I've gone into some places where they said, oh yeah, I've got so-and-so as an executive. I mean, oh my, he died 3 years ago, you know, that's not very helpful, is it? So you've got to review that sort of thing as well. But yeah, if you feel that the family members aren't capable of doing that, then you have to think about somebody else. But if family members are quite happy to do it and it's quite straightforward, then yeah, let them do it. You know, it's up to you really.
Yeah. So another question we've got is, would you recommend having a meeting with yourself and the family members involved in the farm, and then bringing one of family members in a second, or do you do it all in one meeting?
it's up to you again, because you know your family better than me. You know, if I was called in to do it, sometimes they say, oh, can we have a meeting with you first? You know, and I say, well, you might be wasting your time, but you're welcome to do that. And sometimes people want to do that. But why I say to have the other, what I call the off-arm children in it as well, is if you have a meeting without them, they will feel that something's being done behind their backs. And that's when they start kicking up. And so I always say, if you can and you think it's best, have all of them there together so everybody discusses it. And also, what I call the off-farm children understand the problems about this, because you'll be surprised, you know, people who brought up on farms, now working in Cardiff or something like that, and they don't understand things sometimes, you know. And I remember doing one last year it was, and there were two brothers living in Cardiff and the one at home on the farm. And, you know, they were sort of saying, oh, well, you know, it's not fair, he's having the farm and it's worth such and such and all this, you know. And then, so what we did then was we got out the accounts and said, right, okay, this is the profit loss accounts for the last 2 years. And you can see these boys going, is that all you made? You know, end of story. They stood back and let everything happen, you know. And so it's important that those siblings are in that business, because then they can understand what's happened. And if, for instance, I was facilitating, I can handle them to make sure that they understand what's happening, because it's surprising how, you know, some of those siblings say, oh, you know, they're being handed this wonderful farm on a plate, and, you know, they're living in the family home and all this sort of stuff. You know, they need to understand that. But yeah, I will do anything, you know, as far. But if you think that as a family, you'll be better off talking about it together first and then including, but make sure then that they don't feel that something has been decided behind their backs, because that is when they're going to start kicking up, you know. So be careful about it.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I think we've just had sort of like a scenario through on one of the questions. So I'll just quickly read through that. They've got two sons. One is a joiner and one is a plumber within the business. They've now set up a barn conversion. Do you think it would be a good idea to put the younger sons on the barn business?
I would go and get tax advice on this, because there will be tax implications. And depending on your situation, you know, that is the best thing to do, because I would say to everybody, don't do anything without getting tax advice first. And if you're not confident with your own accountant, change your accountant. But, you know, also most of these accountants now have big tax experts, you know, in their offices and all, and so they can advise you on that, because it's very important to get advice from a tax person first, because there will be tax implications, you know. But it depends on the rest of the business and all that. But yeah, you know, that might be the right option. But as I say, get proper advice first, you know, really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I've got just a couple of questions more before we finish for this afternoon. How can you secure the family farm from divorce if the successor's marriage breaks down?
Oh God, now we could talk about 3 hours of this. Yeah, there are things you can do, you know. I mean, you know, what I say to people, first of all, is be very careful about welcoming in-laws into the family, you know, because what I find in some families is, you know, oh my God, my son or my daughter has married this person, and they hold them at arm's length because they're afraid that they're going to run off and half the farm. And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I do say to people, for God's sake, when your sons and daughters get married, welcome the partners into the family. You might not want them in the business, but for God's sake, welcome them into the family, you know. And so that's important, so that you don't put pressure on the marriage from the start. Now, there are things you can do, you know. It depends on the person, if that person is a partner in the business, if they own part of the business, all that sort of stuff. So you need again to talk to a lawyer about this, or a solicitor about this. But you can do things like there are things like, you know, prenuptial agreements or postnuptial agreements that you can do. Now, officially, they are not legal in this country, but they can be done. And it's then looked at as a contract, and if somebody went against it, then it's a breach of contract. So you can do it, but again, I'd be very careful, you know. I would not sort of think, well, my chance is pretty good if I come out with a piece of paper now to either my future son-in-law and put that in front of him and said, look, sign this before you walk down the aisle, you know. You might tell me where to put it, you know. So, and I have actually come across a young woman in recent months who actually refused to get married because the parents of her said, look, we want you to sign this before you get married. And she said, no, I'm not going to get married at all then, you know. So you're going to be very careful about that. But what I have dealt with some very, very big businesses where they have made it not personal. You know, they've said, right, anybody who becomes a partner in this business, they have to sign a prenuptial agreement. And so it's not personal, you know, because you don't want to make it personal. It's not a good idea to say, you know, oh my God, my son's going out with that slapper down the road, we better think about prenuptial agreements, you know, not a good idea. But those can be worked. As I say, they're not official, but they can be used as, you know, a contract. But, and there are other ways of doing things as well. I think, you know, it depends on, again, on your circumstances. Talk to a solicitor about it. There are things that you can do to safeguard the business. I would say as well, though, politics needs to be coming into this. In Scotland, where I do quite a bit of work in Scotland, and they have a system there, and it was talked about to the House of Lords, but then they forgot about it because they talked about Brexit, and now it's COVID-19, and God knows when they're going to talk about this again. But in Scotland, whatever you own when you go into a marriage, you take out. So if you're a young person getting married and you own a farm before you get married, that farm is still yours if you get divorced. Now that's something that maybe we ought to be looking out for England and Wales as well. But that's what happens in Scotland. So very interesting thing. But there we are. That's how it is.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think we'll finish on this question here now. So what would you recommend to do when the parents treat the two daughters in the farm like farm workers rather than potential business partners? So this is from the daughter asking now.
Yeah, I know this is a very difficult one. You know, I would suggest you have a meeting with me so I can sort them out. but I, you know, this has to be thought through. And I think you know, say the two girls now, I would sit and talk to them and say, right, okay, if mum and dad aren't going to change, do you want to stay in this position? Because sadly, I talk to people in their 50s who say, if I'd known it was going to be like this until now, I wouldn't have stayed. I'd have gone off and done my own thing. And so if they're only being treated as workers now, sit down, talk to mum and dad and say, look, and put a deadline on it and say, look, if this doesn't change, we're not happy. We don't want to carry on like this. We're not happy. You've got to mean it, mind. You've got to mean it. If things don't change, then we go in. And I would suggest that you do, because sadly I come across huge mental health issues in this area because people have been promised that they're going to have responsibility and they are treated like, you know, worse than farm workers actually most of the time. And they've hung on in there, and it's just by the time it comes, it's too late because they've got mental health issues. So very, very important to sit down and say, right, okay, where's my boundary, right? Okay, if this is going to carry on for such and such a time, then I'd rather go away. And if you want that, then you've got to mean it and do it. But otherwise, just sit down to mum and dad and say, we're not going to put up with this for any longer. Or you just say, right, okay, I'm going to put up and shut up, but it's your choice in the end. Because sadly, we cannot change other people. I swear people think I've got a magic wand and I'm going to change mum and dad, but I haven't got a magic wand. And so you have to sit down and communicate with this, and you have to be realistic, because if they're not going to change, you have to understand, do I want to put up with this or do I leave? And that's your decision, okay?
Yeah, no, brilliant. So yeah, thank you very much, Sian. I think we'll wrap it up there in terms of questions. I think that just goes to show that there's no simple answer for any of these scenarios. It's all done on a case-by-case basis, and yeah, I suppose, as you mentioned earlier, it's all about planning, isn't it, really, and getting the conversation started.
Absolutely.